You almost never realize the moment control begins, because it does not arrive dressed as control. It doesn't show its hand. It doesn't slam the door shut or wrap you in chains. It arrives gently, disguised as something natural, something human, something so ordinary that you hardly notice it is there at all. That is why it works. If someone tried to dominate you openly, you would resist, rebel, defend yourself. But the ones who truly master the art of control know that the most efficient chains are the ones that never feel like chains. Instead of shouting commands, they whisper suggestions. Instead of threats, they offer guidance. Instead of dragging you by force, they let you walk on your own. Only they quietly rearrange the path so that wherever you go, it leads back to them. At first, the strings are not pulled tightly. They are slack, loose, almost invisible. They let you move. They let you act. They let you feel free. And in that illusion of freedom lies the trap. Because you do not resist what you cannot see. You laugh when you want to laugh. You cry when you want to cry. You fight when you want to fight. But you never stop to wonder, where did the impulse come from? Who planted the feeling? Who shaped the story you tell yourself about why you act the way you act? The strings are not obvious because they are not attached to your body. They are attached to your emotions. And when someone learns how to play those emotions, they no longer need to push or pull. They simply wait. You will act on your own, but your actions will always, somehow, serve them. That is the genius of invisible strings. They convince the puppet that it has never been a puppet at all. Think of your inner life as a theater. On that stage, emotions enter like actors. Fear arrives with trembling hands. Anger storms across with clenched fists. Desire whispers from the corners. You assume they belong to you, that they are born inside you. But what if the spotlight is being controlled from somewhere else? What if there is a hand hidden in the shadows, deciding which actor appears and when? That is how puppet masters work. They know which words to say, which silences to hold, which expressions to show, which gestures to perform, so that the right emotion appears at the right time, steering your thoughts before you even realize they are being steered. Logic does not move most people. Evidence does not move most people. Emotion does. And so long as your emotions can be guided, your decisions, your memories, your beliefs, even your very sense of identity can be reshaped. This is why entire crowds can be swayed by propaganda, why individuals can be trapped in toxic relationships, why whole societies can march to their own destruction convinced they are free. The strings do not pull bodies. They pull hearts, and hearts pull everything else. If you feel afraid, you will obey. If you feel guilty, you will repent. If you feel proud, you will defend, even when what you are defending destroys you. This is the law of the puppet master. Control the emotion, and the rest follows naturally. You think you are writing your own script. In truth, you are acting out the lines someone else placed in your mouth long ago. You defend them with passion because you mistake them for your own creation. You fight with conviction because you believe the stage belongs to you. But the strings are there, invisible in the spotlight, guiding every gesture, every step, every word you speak. The most terrifying thing about invisible strings is not how they control what you do, but how they reshape who you believe you are. A man tricked into anger again and again eventually begins to believe that anger is his nature. A woman constantly nudged into insecurity will eventually call herself weak. Over time, repeated manipulation does not simply change behavior. It creates identity. And once identity has been forged, once the chains are no longer outside you but inside you, escape becomes almost impossible. Because how do you fight something you have already accepted as yourself? That is why puppet masters are patient. They do not seek to control you for a day or even a year. They seek to alter the lens through which you see reality. And once they succeed, they barely need to pull the strings at all. You become self-regulating. You punish yourself when you drift away from the path they created. You reward yourself when you remain inside the lines of the cage they drew. You become your own jailer, your own enforcer, replaying emotional patterns endlessly, never questioning where they came from. And yet you still believe you are free because the strings are invisible. You believe you are choosing your anger, your love, your loyalty, your guilt. You believe your story is your own, even though the ink was poured into your veins by someone else's hand. That is why the unseen strings are not just dangerous, they are lethal. They turn freedom into performance, choice into illusion, and life into a theater where you are both actor and prisoner, applauding yourself for a role you never agreed to play. Until you see the strings, you will never know whether you are the puppet or the hand that pulls. Every puppet requires a point of contact, a place where the string can attach and exert its influence. In the realm of emotions, these points of contact are what we call triggers. A trigger is not just a random button inside you. It is a carefully shaped lever built from your fears, your desires, your memories, and your wounds. Every human being carries them. Some are obvious: the fear of rejection, the craving for approval, the longing to be loved. Others are hidden deep in the subconscious: the memory of a childhood humiliation, the echo of a parent's disappointment, the shame of a past mistake you never forgave yourself for. These levers lie waiting, dormant until someone learns to press them. The puppet master studies you, quietly, patiently. They listen more than they speak, observe more than they act. Every reaction you give them becomes a map of your inner machinery. When you flinch at criticism, they take note. When you glow under praise, they take note. When you tense at silence, they take note. Piece by piece, they assemble the blueprint of your triggers, and once the map is complete, they no longer need brute force to move you. They can press a single lever, and the entire machinery of your emotions responds. That is why emotional control is so devastating, because it doesn't attack the surface of who you are, it attacks the foundation. A person who knows your triggers doesn't need to argue with you, doesn't need to overpower you, doesn't even need to persuade you. They simply activate the right lever, and your emotions do the work for them. You believe you are choosing, when in reality you are only reacting. You are not making a decision. You are being made into one. And every reaction tightens the strings, binding you deeper into the invisible choreography of someone else's design. Imagine walking through your life as though every memory, every scar, every desire has left behind a pressure point on your soul. Some of these pressure points are obvious. You know you fear failure. You know you crave love. You know you resent betrayal. But others remain buried, silent until someone clever enough finds them. That cleverness is what turns ordinary people into puppet masters. They are not guessing. They are testing, measuring, calibrating, and observing. They provoke you with small comments to see if you bristle. They ignore you at just the right moment to see if you panic. They give you validation sparingly to see how desperately you return for more. These experiments are not accidents. They are reconnaissance. Every sigh, every hesitation, every flicker in your eyes is data. And when enough data has been gathered, they hold the blueprint of your emotional architecture. This blueprint does not just reveal your triggers. It reveals how to sequence them, how to combine them, how to play them like chords on an instrument. If they know your pride is your weakness, They will insult you just enough to inflame you, then withdraw to let the silence echo. If they know guilt governs your choices, they will remind you of your debts at the very moment you try to resist them. If they know you cannot stand being abandoned, they will threaten distance until you beg for closeness. You may tell yourself you are in control, but your control is only the illusion granted by someone who has already mapped the cage around you. And the cruel truth is this: the more intimate someone becomes with you, the more complete their blueprint becomes. Lovers, friends, mentors, even family members, all of them have the potential to become puppet masters if they choose, because they have access to the architecture of your heart. The strings are never stronger than when they are tied to the places you thought were safe. The architecture of triggers is not simply about manipulating what you feel in a single moment. It is about constructing cycles. Once a puppet master understands your triggers, they can create patterns of emotional highs and lows that keep you locked in orbit around them. They may wound you, then heal you, then wound you again, so that your dependency deepens with every cycle. They may grant you the approval you crave, then withdraw it suddenly, leaving you scrambling to earn it back, only to reward you again just when you are about to give up. Each cycle strengthens the connection, training your nervous system to respond predictably. Over time, you stop asking whether you even want their approval, their presence, their forgiveness. You only react to the pattern itself, like a lab rat pressing the lever because it cannot remember any other way of living. That is the most sinister outcome of the architecture of triggers. It replaces your will with reflex. Your thoughts may still tell you that you are free, but your behavior tells another story. A story written by someone else, rehearsed by your emotions, and performed endlessly in the theater of your life. And yet, even here, the most frightening part is not that they pull the strings. It is that you no longer see the strings at all. You think the rage is yours. You think the guilt is yours. You think the hope that keeps you waiting, the fear that keeps you silent, the love that keeps you chained, all of it belongs to you. But it doesn't. It belongs to the one who learned how to read your blueprint, who found the levers hidden in the shadows of your soul, and who now plays them at will. And until you learn to see your triggers, until you trace every sudden surge of emotion back to the hand that pressed the lever, you will remain a puppet dancing to a song you never chose. Every cage requires walls, and in the theater of emotions those walls are built from two primal forces, pleasure and pain. They are the oldest instruments of control, older than language, older than civilization itself. Long before human beings spoke words, they learned to obey what rewarded them and to fear what punished them. It is written into the nervous system, etched into the brain like fire and stone. The puppet master knows this instinct well and exploits it with precision. To most people, pleasure feels like freedom and pain feels like constraint, but this is an illusion. Both can be used as shackles if they are given in calculated doses. When the master offers you pleasure, you follow. When they threaten you with pain, you submit. And over time, as the rhythm continues, reward, punishment, reward again, you begin to anticipate their hand before it even moves. You are no longer deciding. You are predicting, adjusting, reacting, bending yourself to avoid the whip or chase the sugar. That is when the chain forms, when you stop moving from your own will and start moving in expectation of theirs. You mistake the pleasure for love, for safety, for success. You mistake the pain for natural consequence. But in truth, both are levers being pulled deliberately, keeping you swinging like a pendulum back and forth between hope and fear. The master does not need to hold you tightly, because you hold yourself. You begin to censor your own desires, to silence your own doubts, to betray your own instincts, all in the name of avoiding punishment or receiving another hit of sweetness. What began as subtle influence becomes a prison of reflex, and reflex is the cruelest prison of all, because it convinces you that the walls are simply the way life is, rather than the design of the one who built them. The mastery of conditioning lies not simply in the use of pleasure or pain, but in their unpredictability. If a reward always follows the same action, it becomes routine. If a punishment always follows the same mistake, it becomes predictable. Predictability creates stability, and stability breeds resistance. But when pleasure and pain arrive at irregular intervals, the mind becomes addicted to the uncertainty. The puppet master understands this better than most, for they know that a person chained to anticipation is more obedient than one chained to certainty. Consider the gambler at a slot machine. Each pull of the lever rarely brings a prize, but every so often, the lights flash, coins fall, and the thrill surges through their veins. It is not the win that traps them, but the possibility of the win. Now consider the one in love with someone who manipulates through affection. The warmth is not constant. It is given sparingly, sometimes withdrawn without explanation, sometimes returned with intensity so overwhelming that it erases the memory of the cold silence. That rhythm of absence and return, of neglect and reward, keeps the heart tethered, always waiting for the next flood of sweetness. Pain works the same way. It is not constant cruelty that enslaves. It is the unpredictable sting. A sudden insult when you expected kindness. A cold dismissal when you thought you were safe. A punishment that arrives not when you have done wrong, but when you dared to expect mercy. These irregular doses of pain destabilize your sense of cause and effect. You no longer trust yourself, because you no longer know which of your actions invite cruelty and which invite care. And so you surrender to the master's rhythm, waiting, hoping, fearing, adjusting endlessly. In this cycle, your nervous system becomes their instrument, strung tight between dread and desire. What makes this form of control so devastating is that, over time, it becomes internalized. The external whip and the external sugar are no longer needed, because the brain begins to anticipate and reproduce them on its own. You flinch at shadows long after the blow has landed. You crave validation long after the voice of approval has gone silent. You punish yourself before anyone else can, and you reward yourself with imagined promises that never arrive. In this way, the puppet master plants themselves inside you, becoming the unseen warden of your choices. The fear of pain guides you like a compass, pushing you away from risks, silencing your dissent, keeping you in line even when no one is watching. The hunger for pleasure drives you forward like a carrot on a stick, convincing you that if you just endure a little longer, obey a little better, stay a little quieter, the reward will finally come. And so you walk willingly into your own cage, believing it is the only path available. The brilliance of this system lies in its simplicity. It requires no chains, no bars, no visible locks. The chains are forged inside your nervous system, inside the chemical storms of dopamine and cortisol, inside the stories you tell yourself about what you deserve and what you must avoid. To escape them, you would have to confront the possibility that the emotions you trust most, hope, fear, desire, relief, may not be your own. You would have to admit that your heart has been conditioned like a laboratory animal, taught to jump through hoops for rewards that may never come. Few are willing to face that truth. It is easier to believe that the cycle is natural, that love must hurt, that approval must be earned, that safety must always follow fear. And so the puppet master continues their work, unseen, unchallenged, smiling as you cling tighter to the chains that feel like the rhythm of life itself. The most effective form of control is not the one that declares itself openly, but the one that convinces you there is no control at all. To hold the strings in plain sight would awaken resistance, suspicion, rebellion. But to bury those strings deep within your choices, to weave them into the fabric of your own reasoning, that is mastery. This is why the illusion of autonomy is so dangerous. You believe you are moving of your own will, choosing freely, shaping your path. But beneath each decision lies a trail of nudges, invisible pressures, subtle manipulations that direct your hand long before you realize it. The puppet master does not say do this. They say choose, but they quietly frame the options, narrow the field, and define the consequences. You think you are free because the chain does not feel like a chain. It feels like desire, like fear, like duty, like common sense. In truth, autonomy is often the stage on which control hides most effectively. Consider how advertisements do not order you to buy. They simply present images, symbols, and emotions until you cannot distinguish your own cravings from the ones planted in you. Consider how politics does not command you to think a certain way, but instead offers narratives, heroes, and villains that quietly sculpt your sense of reality. The most chilling example is in relationships, where one person can manipulate the emotional climate so subtly that you adapt your tone, your thoughts, even your identity, without realizing you are bending. The illusion of autonomy thrives on the belief that the voice you obey is your own. But if the framework of your choices was set by someone else, how much of that voice is truly yours? The answer is unsettling. Much of what you believe to be freedom is simply the echo of invisible instructions whispered long before you thought you were choosing. The architecture of this illusion is built on psychology's most predictable foundations. Humans are social animals, wired to seek approval, belonging, and harmony. The puppet master exploits this wiring not by overtly commanding, but by tilting the environment in ways that steer your instincts. A carefully timed smile makes you crave validation. A subtle withdrawal of attention makes you doubt yourself. The room grows tense, and you rush to smooth it over, not realizing you are obeying a script written for you. Each of these micro-adjustments feels voluntary, but in truth they are calculated responses to stimuli designed to push you in a certain direction. This same mechanism plays out on larger scales. Culture whispers unspoken rules into your mind. What is attractive? What is respectable? What is shameful? What is success? You adopt them as if they were your own convictions, defending them with passion, never suspecting they were planted. The brilliance lies in the fact that you can feel autonomous while being entirely conditioned. You laugh at the idea of being controlled because no one is forcing you. Yet that laughter is itself the mark of control, the reflexive defense of a system you did not choose. And when you look deeper, you notice how often your free choices lead you back into the arms of those who benefit from them. The brand that profits from your craving, the leader who thrives on your loyalty, the partner who gains from your submission. Autonomy in this sense is not freedom. It is the mask that keeps you from questioning. The strings are invisible precisely because they feel like part of you, because you cannot imagine that the desires rising inside you may have been carefully constructed to guide you towards someone else's design. What makes this illusion nearly impossible to escape is that it does not just operate outside of you. It rewires the very mechanisms by which you define yourself. When you say, "This is what I want," how can you be certain it is truly yours and not the residue of countless manipulations? Every story you have heard, every punishment you have endured, every reward you have received has carved its grooves into your nervous system. Your habits, your reactions, your desires, all of them may be echoes of hands that shaped you in silence. The autonomy you feel is often nothing more than the afterimage of those sculptors, lingering long after they are gone. The puppet master does not need to stand over you forever. Once the conditioning is complete, you become your own jailer. You choose the prison again and again, mistaking it for freedom. That is the horror of this illusion. The master can walk away, and you will continue to obey the invisible patterns they left behind. Escaping this requires a brutal kind of honesty, one that few dare to face. You must question your own desires as if they were strangers. You must dissect your fears until you find the fingerprints of someone else's hand upon them. You must learn to separate the voice of survival from the voice of conditioning. Only then can you begin to carve out a fragment of true autonomy, if such a thing even exists. For most, the illusion remains unbroken, because tearing it apart feels like tearing apart the self. And so the performance continues. The puppet moves, believing it dances to its own rhythm, while in truth the choreography was written long before the music began. Emotions are not private possessions. They are infections, spreading silently from one nervous system to another. You feel anger in a crowded room not because the words spoken were aimed at you, but because the atmosphere itself vibrates with hostility, and your body absorbs it like smoke filling your lungs. You laugh in the company of others, not always because the joke was sharp, but because the rhythm of joy is contagious, and your nervous system mirrors it before you consciously choose. This is the hidden mechanism of influence. If the puppet master can infect the emotional air you breathe, they no longer need to command you directly. Instead, they seed the room with the energy they want you to carry, and you adopt it as if it were born inside you. This is why tyrants rely on orchestrated rallies, why manipulators control tone more than content, why abusers cycle between rage and tenderness. They know that emotions are the most efficient vectors of control. Rational arguments can be resisted, orders can be disobeyed, but emotional contagion bypasses the intellect and seeps into the body before resistance even has a chance. Once you feel the emotion, you justify it afterward, building stories around it to protect your pride, never realizing the feeling was never yours to begin with. The puppet master thrives on this blindness, on your assumption that what you feel must have originated within. But what if much of your inner life is nothing more than residue from others? What if your joy, your grief, your panic, your hope are echoes passed down a chain of unseen contagions, spreading like fire across dry fields of human vulnerability? The realization is terrifying. The self you cling to may be less a solitary flame and more a flicker carried endlessly from torch to torch, lit by hands you never saw. The science of this infection has always been visible, though we rarely admit its implications. Neuroscience calls it mirror neurons, cells that fire when we witness another's action or expression, as though we ourselves were performing it. Psychology calls it emotional contagion, the unconscious transfer of moods through mimicry, tone, and rhythm. But the puppet master does not need science. Instinct has always told them the truth. They know that anger delivered with conviction can ignite a crowd faster than reason ever could. They know that fear whispered with trembling breath can immobilize stronger wills than chains could bind. They know that the soft glow of affection, strategically given, can make you forgive what your rational mind would never allow. These infections spread beneath awareness, like viruses that use the machinery of the host to replicate. You may believe you are acting out of reason, but your reason is only retrofitting the infection after it has already taken root. This is why entire nations can be steered into frenzy, why mobs burn cities, why markets collapse not from data but from panic. The individual feels they are deciding, but the tide of emotions sweeps them in directions no solitary will could choose. On the personal scale, it is no different. The manipulative partner does not need to argue when they can set the emotional climate of the home. The calculating boss does not need to give direct orders when the room already trembles with the pressure of unspoken fear. You breathe it in, you adapt, and then you swear you chose freely. But what you call freedom may simply be infection wearing the mask of choice. The puppet master needs only to carry the strongest contagion into the room, and the rest will bend, echoing it until it becomes the unquestioned atmosphere. The most haunting truth of emotional contagion is that you become not only a victim, but also a carrier. Once an infection enters you, it rarely stops at your skin. You spread it further, often without knowing. The anger you absorbed from one voice bleeds into the way you speak to another. The despair you inhaled in silence becomes the heaviness in your child's eyes. The fear implanted in you becomes the hesitation in your friend's step. The puppet master does not need to infect every individual directly. They only need to plant the seed in a few, and the rest of the network will do the work. This is how control scales from the private to the public, from the one-on-one to the mass. You become both prisoner and jailer, carrying the chains to others, perpetuating the same atmosphere that once subdued you. And because you mistake these emotions for your own, you defend them, justify them, and spread them with conviction. Few things are harder to resist than a feeling that feels authentic, even if it was born in someone else's design. To break this cycle requires a brutal form of awareness. You must learn to question the origin of what you feel. Is this sorrow truly yours, or did it seep in from the despair of another? Is this rage your own, or is it a residue of someone else's fire? Is this hope authentic, or was it planted to keep you docile? Most people will never ask these questions, because doing so threatens the very identity they cling to. And so the contagion spreads endlessly, the strings tightening not by force, but by transmission. The puppet master smiles, for the infection is self-sustaining now. You believe you are simply living, but in truth you are carrying and multiplying emotions that were never fully yours, feeding a system that thrives on your blindness. Gratitude is spoken of as a virtue, as one of the purest markers of a noble soul. To be thankful is to be human, to acknowledge the hand that lifted you when you were weak, the kindness that fed you when you were hungry, the support that appeared when you had nothing left. But what happens when this virtue is weaponized? What happens when gratitude, instead of being the fragrance of generosity, becomes the leash that binds you to the one who gave? This is the hidden tyranny of gratitude, the debt that never truly ends. The puppet master does not always control by fear or pleasure. Sometimes they control by giving, by offering help in ways so well-timed and seemingly selfless that you feel your very existence is owed to them. And once you feel that debt, invisible chains tighten. Every decision you make is shadowed by the silent obligation to repay, even when no explicit demand is spoken. You censor your words out of respect. You silence your doubts out of loyalty. You bend your will because you do not want to appear ungrateful. Slowly, the gift transforms into a prison. The act of kindness becomes the anchor that keeps you from drifting free. You do not rebel because rebellion feels like betrayal. You do not walk away because walking away feels like a crime. In this way, gratitude ceases to be a light of the heart and becomes a burden strapped to your shoulders, pressing you down beneath the weight of obligation. And the most insidious part is this: the puppet master can maintain control without ever raising their voice, without ever lifting a hand, because you will police yourself, convincing yourself that it is only right, only fair, only human to remain in chains forged from kindness. This form of control is uniquely cruel because it plays upon the very values that make relationships sacred: reciprocity, loyalty, acknowledgement. These are the fibers that hold families, friendships, and societies together. But when twisted by manipulation, they become ropes instead of threads, strangling rather than binding with warmth. The tyrant of gratitude never needs to demand repayment directly. They rely on your own conscience to do the work. It is the quiet glance that reminds you of the favor they once granted. It is the casual phrase, "After everything I've done for you," drop like a knife into your chest. It is the unspoken comparison, the unvoiced suggestion that you would be nothing without their generosity. And so, every act of independence feels like betrayal. Every attempt at autonomy feels like ingratitude. The cruel paradox is that the more good they appear to do, the stronger the chain becomes. If they gave you food when you were hungry, do you not owe them your loyalty? If they opened a door you could not open, do you not owe them your silence when they exploit you? If they lifted you from despair, do you not owe them your compliance when they demand something in return? In this twisted logic, gratitude ceases to be a free expression of love or respect. It becomes a contract you never signed but feel compelled to honor forever. The puppet master thrives here because they have found a prison that feels holy. You are not forced into submission. You walk into it willingly, telling yourself that it is moral, decent, and honorable to remain under their shadow. But morality itself becomes corrupted in this exchange, and what was once virtue becomes nothing more than another mechanism of control. The tyranny of gratitude endures because it hides behind the mask of righteousness. To question it feels immoral. To resist it feels monstrous. Who dares to accuse kindness of being a weapon? Who dares to spit in the hand that once fed them? This is why so many remain silent, enduring the weight of obligation long after the original gift has lost its context. Entire lives can be lived this way. Children bound to parents who remind them endlessly of the sacrifices made. Lovers tied to partners who never let them forget the moments of rescue. Employees shackled to bosses who claim to have given them a chance. Gratitude becomes less about memory and more about ownership, less about appreciation and more about submission. And the cruelest truth of all is that the debtor may begin to love their chains. They may begin to see their own obedience as proof of their nobility, their endurance as proof of their goodness. They tell themselves, "At least I am not ungrateful." Yet deep inside, the truth gnaws. The gratitude demanded ceases to be gratitude at all. True gratitude must be free, spontaneous, untethered. The moment it is extracted, expected, or weaponized, it becomes corruption masquerading as virtue. To escape this form of control is not to erase memory or deny the help once given. It is to recognize that a gift given with strings was never a gift at all, but an investment in your obedience. The puppet master counts on your fear of appearing heartless, your dread of being labeled ungrateful. And so long as you cling to that fear, you remain a willing prisoner, bowing not because you must, but because you believe it is right. That is the genius of this tyranny. You kneel of your own accord, convinced that to rise would be the true betrayal. But in reality, the greatest betrayal is to your own freedom, as you trade your will for the comfort of appearing grateful in a world where even kindness has become a chain. The cruelest part of invisible control is not the presence of the strings, but the fact that you grow so accustomed to them that you forget they exist. By the time you realize your emotions are being pulled, your reactions have already hardened into habits. You defend what was planted in you. You protect the very forces that keep you bound, and you believe the weight on your shoulders is nothing more than life itself. To break the strings requires something unnatural, almost violent, because it demands that you turn against what feels most familiar, your own emotions. How do you untangle yourself from fear when fear has always felt like truth? How do you resist desire when desire burns in your veins as if it were your essence? The puppet master relies on this confusion, knowing that most will never even attempt escape, because escape requires a form of betrayal, not against the master, but against the false self that has been constructed through years of conditioning. The first crack in the prison comes when you dare to ask the forbidden question, is this feeling really mine? That single act of suspicion is a hammer against the glass walls of illusion. You start to notice patterns, the sudden guilt that only rises in their presence, the fear that only emerges when their shadow looms, the joy that feels manufactured because it depends entirely on their approval. You begin to separate your inner world into what is authentic and what is implanted. This separation is painful because it reveals how much of your life has been shaped by invisible hands. But without that pain, there can be no freedom. To break the strings is to confront the possibility that much of what you have called yourself has been nothing more than choreography, a dance scripted by another mind. And the courage to face this truth is the beginning of reclaiming what was stolen. But awareness alone is not enough. Knowing that you are a puppet does not sever the strings. It only makes their pull more visible. The real challenge lies in resisting the reflexes that have been conditioned into you. Every fiber of your body will demand that you respond the old way, appease when threatened, chase when rewarded, shrink when dismissed, bloom when praised. These patterns are not abstract. They live in the nervous system, in the chemicals that flood your bloodstream, in the tightness of your throat when you think of defiance. To break the strings is to fight not only the master, but your own biology, to sit in the fire of discomfort without reaching for the relief you were trained to seek. It means enduring the storm of guilt when you say no for the first time. It means sitting with fear when you refuse to bend. It means carrying loneliness when you walk away from the manipulative embrace that once defined your safety. This is why so few escape, because the process feels like death. And in a sense, it is the death of the conditioned self, the one sculpted by fear, reward, and obligation. But what is born in its place is not chaos, as the puppet master would have you believe. What is born is space. Space to feel without being dictated, to act without being coerced, to think without a whisper guiding your conclusions. Space for silence that is not punishment, for joy that is not manufactured, for sorrow that is not planted. The act of breaking the strings is not a single dramatic rebellion. It is a long, grueling practice of choosing authenticity over reflex, even when every nerve screams for the comfort of control. And yet, every time you resist, the strings weaken. Every time you pause instead of reacting, every time you question instead of obeying, you reclaim another fragment of yourself. What lies beyond the breaking of the strings is not pure freedom, because total freedom may be an illusion in itself, but it is something closer to clarity. It is the ability to see when influence is at work, to recognize when emotions have been infected, to notice when gratitude has turned into debt or when silence has become a command. Clarity does not mean you are immune. It means you are no longer blind. And blindness is the puppet master's greatest weapon. Once you learn to see, the spell begins to dissolve. You may still feel fear, but you will name it as manipulation. You may still crave approval, but you will know it as conditioning. You may still be tempted by comfort, but you will recognize the chain hidden beneath the velvet. This recognition itself is power, because the master's grip depends on your unawareness. The moment you see the strings, their hold weakens, not because they vanish, but because you no longer mistake them for your own will. The journey does not end there. It is not a single escape, but a lifetime of vigilance. Every new relationship, every system you enter, every voice you hear carries the potential to weave new strings around your heart. But once you have broken them before, you know they can be broken again. The master loses their godlike aura, and you realize they are not magicians at all, only manipulators whose tricks dissolve under scrutiny. Breaking the strings is not a promise of eternal autonomy, but it is the reclamation of choice. It is the moment you stop moving in someone else's rhythm and begin, however imperfectly, to hear your own. That sound may be faint at first, but it is the sound of life lived not as choreography, but as creation. And in that fragile, defiant space, the puppet becomes something more. The one who finally remembers they were never meant to hang from strings at all.